Hi, here in this video, let's know about The Death of the Moth by Virginia Woolf. The Death of the Moth is a narrative essay in which she writes about the wretched and pitiful moth's death. The essay represents the short life of a moth, which corresponds to the true nature of life and death. Let's look at the complete summary and the essay.
The Death of the Moth by Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf's The Death of the Moth is a narrative essay in which she writes about the wretched and pitiful moth's death. The essay represents the short life of a moth, which corresponds to the true nature of life and death. She is moved by the moth's struggle and fight against death, and she personifies it by giving it the human pronoun him. The author begins the essays by referring to moths as not being true moths because they do not convey the true sense of dark autumn and ivy blossom to her. She refers to them as a hybrid creature that bears no resemblance to butterflies or their ancestors. Despite its hybrid nature, the author is drawn to the moth. Woolf tells the story of an amusing summer morning when the entire landscape outside has moved with vigor. Everything around her, full of vigor, amuses her, and she is unable to concentrate on her book. She is thinking about nature and all of the processes that nature has inspired her when she notices a moth flying and trembling from one side of the window to the other. She finds the moth to be alive and is so enchanted by him that she can't stop watching it. While moving from one side of the window to the other, she says that anyone watching it will feel sorry for him because he was not only small but also alone. There was nothing else for him to do but fly dynamically from one corner of the windowsill to the other. She compares the size of the moth to the size of the outer world, which is large and energetic, and imagines that despite its small size, the moth is highly energetic. She wonders what he would do if it was a little bigger. The moths, which fly at random, also fly close to the author. Woolf considers his texture to be thin but pure fiber, with a frail body supported by enormous energy. He is small but full of life, she claims. The energy, strength, and size of the moth generate a complex thought in the author's mind about him, but she claims that these thoughts may also be generated in the minds of others. The moth struck her as both spectacular and pitiful in her mind. His depiction of the true nature of life is marvelous. Dancing, zigzagging, and full of energy. She claims that while watching the moth, one temporarily forgets about his life and concentrates on it. And he can't get over its uniqueness. But one feels pity for him because of his small and insignificant life. After a while, he eventually settles himself on the window by continuous dancing. He was exhausted, but he wanted to fly again. He makes an attempt but fails. The little mortal has had enough. His movement appears awkward to her. He tries to get up several times but each time fails. Death, the little, poor, and pitiful creature, finally sneaks up on him. The author tries to help him but then gives up, realizing that it is a death sign. The author wonders about the foe against whom the moth fights for its life. She looks out the window to see if there is anything outside but finds nothing. Nonetheless, she notices the moth's final struggle for survival. She is captivated by his strength and will to live. He was struggling with his small legs, but nothing stands a chance against death, she says. His final moves, his final protest, were magnificent. He couldn't do anything else but correct his posture. The author's final words are extremely powerful. She explains the true nature of the universe and its inhabitants. Nobody cares about your struggles in life or how hard you fight death to stay alive. But everyone sympathizes with life. Similarly, no one is interested in the moth's struggle against death. According to Woolf, the moth fights for a life that no one values, desires, or wishes to keep. According to Woolf, this difference in attitude moves one strangely. She picks up her pencil, which had become useless after watching the moth's constant efforts. The death had appeared, and the moth's struggle was over. She realized the strangeness of life and death as she looked at him. Just as life was strange a few minutes ago, death is strange now. To her, the moth appears to be saying, life is stronger than he is. Let's look at the complete essay. The Death of the Moth. By Virginia Woolf. Moths that fly by day are not properly to be called moths. They do not excite that pleasant sense of dark autumn nights and ivy blossom which the commonest yellow underwing asleep in the shadow of the curtain never fails to rouse in us. They are hybrid creatures, neither gay like butterflies nor somber like their own species. Nevertheless the present specimen, with his narrow hay-colored wings, fringed with a tassel of the same color, seemed to be content with life. It was a pleasant morning, mid-September, mild, benignant, yet with a keener breath than that of the summer months. The plough was already scoring the field opposite the window, and where the share had been, the earth was pressed flat and gleamed with moisture. Such vigor came rolling in from the fields and the down beyond that it was difficult to keep the eyes strictly turned upon the book. The rooks too were keeping one of their annual festivities, soaring round the tree-tops until it looked as if a vast net with thousands of black knots in it had been cast up into the air, which, after a few moments sank slowly down upon the trees until every twig seemed to have a knot at the end of it. Then, suddenly, the net would be thrown into the air again in a wider circle this time, with the utmost clamour and vociferation. As though to be thrown into the air and settle slowly down upon the treetops were a tremendously exciting experience. The same energy which inspired the rooks, the ploughmen, the horses, and even, it seemed, the lean bareback downs, sent the moth fluttering from side to side of his square of the window pane. One could not help watching him. One was, indeed, conscious of a queer feeling of pity for him. The possibilities of pleasure seemed that morning so enormous and so various that to have only a moth's part in life, and a day moth's at that, appeared a hard fate. And his zest in enjoying his meagre opportunities to the full, pathetic. He flew vigorously to one corner of his compartment, and, after waiting there a second, flew across to the other. What remained for him but to fly to a third corner and then to a fourth? That was all he could do, in spite of the size of the downs, the width of the sky, the far-off smoke of houses, and the romantic voice, now and then, of a steamer out at sea. What he could do he did. Watching him, it seemed as if a fibre, very thin but pure, of the enormous energy of the world had been thrust into his frail and diminutive body. As often as he crossed the pane, I could fancy that a thread of vital light became visible. He was little or nothing but life. Yet, because he was so small, and so simple a form of the energy that was rolling in at the open window and driving its way through so many narrow and intricate corridors in my own brain and in those of other human beings, there was something marvelous as well as pathetic about him. It was as if someone had taken a tiny bead of pure life and decking it as lightly as possible with down and feathers, had set it dancing and zigzagging to show us the true nature of life. Thus displayed one could not get over the strangeness of it. One is apt to forget all about life, seeing it humped and bossed and garnished and cumbered so that it has to move with the greatest circumspection and dignity. Again, the thought of all that life might have been had he been born in any other shape caused one to view his simple activities with a kind of pity. After a time, tired by his dancing apparently, he settled on the window ledge in the sun, and, the queer spectacle being at an end, I forgot about him. Then, looking up, my eye was caught by him. He was trying to resume his dancing, but seemed either so stiff or so awkward that he could only flutter to the bottom of the window pane, and when he tried to fly across it he failed. Being intent on other matters I watched these futile attempts for a time without thinking, unconsciously waiting for him to resume his flight. As one waits for a machine that has stopped momentarily, to start again without considering the reason of its failure. After perhaps a seventh attempt he slipped from the wooden ledge and fell, fluttering his wings, onto his back on the window sill. The helplessness of his attitude roused me. It flashed upon me that he was in difficulties, he could no longer raise himself. His legs struggled vainly, but, as I stretched out a pencil, meaning to help him to right himself, it came over me that the failure and awkwardness were the approach of death. I laid the pencil down again. The legs agitated themselves once more. I looked as if for the enemy against which he struggled. I looked out of doors. What had happened there? Presumably it was midday, and work in the fields had stopped. Stillness and quiet had replaced the previous animation. The birds had taken themselves off to feed in the brooks. The horses stood still. Yet the power was there all the same. Massed outside, indifferent, impersonal, not attending to anything in particular. Somehow it was opposed to the little hay-colored moth. It was useless to try to do anything. One could only watch the extraordinary efforts made by those tiny legs against an oncoming doom which could, had it chosen, have submerged an entire city, not merely a city, but masses of human beings, nothing, I knew, had any chance against death. Nevertheless, after a pause of exhaustion, the legs fluttered again. It was superb, this last protest, and so frantic that he succeeded at last in righting himself. One's sympathies, of course, were all on the side of life. Also, when there was nobody to care or to know. This gigantic effort on the part of an insignificant little moth, against a power of such magnitude, to retain what no one else valued or desired to keep, moved one strangely. Again, somehow, one saw life, a pure bead. I lifted the pencil again, useless though I knew it to be. But even as I did so, the unmistakable tokens of death showed themselves. The body relaxed, and instantly grew stiff. The struggle was over. The insignificant little creature now knew death. As I looked at the dead moth, this minute wayside triumph of so great a force over so mean an antagonist filled me with wonder. Just as life had been strange a few minutes before, so death was now as strange. The moth, having righted himself, now lay most decently and uncomplainingly composed. Oh yes, he seemed to say. Death is stronger than I am. End of the essay. Thank you. Thank you.